The village stood on the edge of a great river, a living force that carved its way through fields and forests, feeding the land with its endless flow. The people both feared and revered it. They drew water from its banks, fished from its depths, and sang songs to it during planting season, but they never forgot its dangers. Floods had swept away houses before, children had vanished into its currents. The river was not just water, it was spirit, breath, memory. To speak ill of it was to invite disaster. In this village lived a girl, quiet and slender, whose presence went unnoticed by most. Her mother had died when she was very young, leaving her in the care of a stepmother who did not see her as a daughter but as a burden. Her father, once her protector, had grown weak under his new wife's voice, retreating into silence whenever cruelty rose in the house. The girl did the chores no one else wanted: scrubbing, fetching water, cleaning fish guts, hauling firewood. Yet no praise was ever given. She faltered, she was scolded. She succeeded, she was ignored. She carried her sorrow alone, her tears shed only at the river's edge where no one would see. The river became her only confidant. She would sit on the damp earth and whisper into the water all the words she dared not speak aloud. She told it of her loneliness, her hunger, her small dreams of being seen. When her tears fell, the river carried them away, rippling softly as though listening. The villagers sometimes saw her there, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the dark water. "A strange child," they murmured, "always crying by the river." Yet none stopped to ask why. They were too busy, too wary of becoming entangled in another's grief. The stepmother noticed too, but where others saw strangeness, she saw annoyance. "Always moping, always sniveling," she spat one evening. "She's like a shadow that refuses to vanish." Her words burned the girl more deeply than fire, but she bit her tongue. And so the days passed, each the same as the last. Work, silence, neglect. Only the river knew her secrets, only the river received her tears. At times, in the stillness of dawn, she thought she heard something beneath the sound of flowing water, a faint hum like a low song too deep to understand. She would lean closer, but the current only laughed with its ripples and went on. The girl never imagined that her weeping, small and forgotten by those around her, would one day stir the river itself into song. For though the people of the village treated sorrow as something to ignore or discard, the river remembered. It listened. It carried every tear into its depths, weaving them into its eternal current. And it waited for the night when silence would no longer be enough. That night would come soon, though the girl did not yet know it. For her stepmother had grown weary of her presence entirely. Plans had already begun to form, cruel plans that would send the girl once more to the water's edge, but this time not by her own choosing. And when that moment came, the river would not remain silent. The day of abandonment did not arrive with thunder or warning, but with ordinary sunlight. The villagers carried on as always, mending nets, grinding grain, and tending fires. To the girl, it seemed like any other morning, chores waiting, silence pressing heavy on her shoulders. But beneath the ordinary, something dark had been decided. Her stepmother had long been whispering into her father's ear, "She is of no use to us. She eats food she does not earn. She is a curse in this house." The father resisted weakly, but his voice was brittle as dry reeds. Each day he grew more silent until at last he gave no answer at all. The decision was no longer his. That afternoon the stepmother called to the girl. "Come," she said, her tone unusually calm. "We will walk to the river. You must fetch reeds for weaving and perhaps fish if the water is kind." The girl obeyed without question. Her hands were used to labor, and the river was her only comfort. She followed, carrying nothing but a small basket. When they reached the banks, the sun was already sliding low. The air was heavy, golden with dust motes, the river glowing like molten bronze. The girl bent down, ready to gather reeds as told. She did not notice the stepmother stepping back, her shadow drawing away from her. "You will not return home," the woman said coldly. The girl froze, her hands tightening around the reeds. Slowly she turned, eyes wide with confusion. "Stepmother? You heard me." The woman's voice was sharp as a blade. "This is where you belong, crying by the water. You bring sorrow to every roof you live under. Better to leave you here than let you drain us dry." The girl's lips parted, but no words came. A lump of grief rose in her throat, heavier than stone. She wanted to beg, to plead, but she knew it would make no difference. The stepmother's eyes were not eyes at all, but pits of disdain. "You will not come back," she said again. "If you try, the door will not open for you." With that, she turned and walked away, her steps crunching through the dry grass, not once looking back. The girl stood frozen as the shadow of her stepmother disappeared into the distance. Her legs trembled, her hands shook. She ran after her just a little, calling out, "Wait! Please don't leave me." But her cries were swallowed by the vastness of the riverbank. By the time she stopped running, the woman was gone. She sank to the ground, clutching her basket, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Around her, the river flowed with steady indifference. Its endless voice whispered and hissed as if mocking her loneliness. The girl buried her face in her knees and wept, the sound raw and aching. In the village, no one asked where she was. The stepmother returned home with an empty basket, telling neighbors with a sigh, "The child is gone. She wandered away, perhaps into the forest." Poor thing was never right in the head. And though some villagers frowned, none pressed the matter. Children went missing sometimes. Sorrow was easier to ignore than to face. But the river did not ignore. As the sun fell below the horizon, the girl's cries carried across the water. Her voice trembled in the air like the cry of a bird separated from its flock. The reeds bent with her grief. The current shifted. Somewhere deep beneath the surface something stirred. The girl did not know it yet, but her abandonment was not the end. It was the beginning, the first note in a song the river had been waiting to sing. Night came slowly, like a hand pulling a dark veil across the sky. The last hues of orange bled away, and the world softened into shadows. The girl remained by the river, knees tucked to her chest, her breath shivering in the cooling air. She had cried until her eyes ached, but the tears did not stop. They slid down her cheeks silently now, a steady stream that matched the water's endless flow. The forest behind her grew restless. Crickets began their songs, owls stirred in the branches, and something unseen rustled through the grass. She should have been afraid. A child left alone in the wilderness at night was prey for hunger, for beasts, for the cold. Yet her grief was too heavy for fear. She thought only of the home she had been cast from, the rough walls, the smoky air, even the cruel glances of her stepmother. To be denied even that, it hollowed her out. "Why?" she whispered into the night. Her voice cracked, and the word was carried off by the breeze. No answer came. Only the river's low, ceaseless murmur, water brushing against stone. She leaned forward, staring into the current. The moon, pale and watchful, lay across its surface like a silver path. She wondered if she could follow that path. If she stepped in, would the water carry her far enough to forget her sorrow? The thought frightened her, yet it clung to her mind. She dipped her hand into the current. The water was cool, and it curled around her fingers as if holding them gently. She let her tears fall into it, one by one, and watched as they disappeared without trace. And then, something strange. The river shifted. It was subtle at first, like a pause between breaths. The current slowed, or perhaps it only seemed so, as if waiting. The girl tilted her head, frowning through her tears. That was when she heard it. Her name. Soft at first, almost mistaken for wind. A low hum threaded through the water, and within it, a word, her word. She gasped, her heart stuttering. Again it came. Clearer this time. Her name, woven into the river's flow, rising and falling with the current. The girl scrambled back, her basket clattering to the ground. Her eyes widened, fixed on the dark water. "Who's there?" she whispered. But only the river moved, silver light trembling across its surface. She pressed her hands to her ears. "I'm imagining it," she told herself. "I've cried too much. I'm hearing things." But the sound did not fade. Her name continued, now entwined with tones as soft as singing. The river was not mocking her sorrow, it was answering it. Her breath caught. A shiver ran down her arms. She edged closer, peering into the black depths. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw faces, not human, not entirely, but glimmers of something alive, their mouths moving with the song. She blinked and they were gone, leaving only ripples. She trembled, torn between terror and wonder. The world had abandoned her, but here was something vast and ancient, speaking her name as though it belonged to her alone. The night stretched on. Stars pierced the sky, bright and countless, and the moon climbed higher. Still she sat by the bank, listening. Her sobs had quieted, replaced by awe. Every time the melody rose, she felt a thread pull through her chest, stitching together what grief had torn. The river was no longer indifferent. It was her companion, her witness, her secret protector. When her eyelids grew heavy and she curled against the reeds, she did not feel entirely forsaken. For as she drifted into uneasy sleep, the current carried on, whispering her name into the darkness, again and again, as if it would never let the sound die. The girl awoke at dawn, her face damp with dew, her body stiff from sleeping on the riverbank. For a moment she forgot where she was. She reached out, expecting the hard floor of her hut, the smoky air, the creak of her stepmother moving about. Instead, her fingers brushed wet grass, and the gentle sound of flowing water filled her ears. And then she remembered. The crying, the darkness, the voice of the river whispering her name. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. The river flowed calmly now, glinting under the early sun, as though it had never spoken at all. Was it a dream? She murmured. Yet deep inside she knew it had been real. The water had sung to her. She could not deny it. She leaned forward, cupping her hands into the current, bringing it to her lips. The water tasted different that morning, cooler, sharper, almost alive. She swallowed, and a strange warmth spread through her chest, as though something within her had woken. She stood, brushing the dirt from her dress, and that was when she saw it. The ground near the bank had changed. Her tears from the night before had soaked into the earth, but instead of drying into nothing, the soil was blooming. Tiny green shoots pushed upward, delicate and trembling, though the season for planting was long past. She bent down, touching one with wonder. "Life from sorrow," she whispered. As the day brightened, she walked along the river, her bare feet sinking into the mud. The water seemed to follow her with its voice, not words this time but tones like a low humming song. She felt lighter with every step, as if her grief was no longer her own to carry. The river had taken it, weaving it into something greater. By afternoon, whispers had spread among the villagers. Children fetching water stopped at the bank, staring in confusion at the sprouting plants. Women muttered that the river seemed louder than before, its surface restless even in still air. Some swore they heard their own names carried in the rush of the current, though none admitted it aloud. But the girl stayed closest, her eyes never leaving the water. That night, when the moon returned, the river grew wild. Its surface shimmered silver, broken by sudden ripples though no wind stirred. The girl lay awake, watching, and then she saw them again, the faint shapes beneath the surface. Faces, half hidden, moving like shadows under glass. They turned toward her, mouths forming her name. She gasped, covering her mouth. She should have run, but her feet refused to move. Instead she knelt, leaning close, her breath fogging the air. One face, clearer than the rest, rose toward the surface. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with malice, but with a sadness that mirrored her own. When the water broke, it did not spill, its lips parted and a voice, soft and resonant, slipped out. "You are not forgotten." The girl clutched her chest, tears burning her eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. The voice came again, though it did not seem to come from any single face, but from the river itself. "We are the ones the world cast aside. The water carries what men abandon. Keeps memory. It keeps truth." Her hands trembled. The river was not only water, it was a keeper of all the lost, all the forsaken. And now it had claimed her. The current swelled, lapping higher at the bank. The faces dissolved into ripples, yet the humming song remained, circling around her like a cloak. For the first time since her stepfamily had cast her out, she did not feel small or powerless. Something vast and eternal had taken her sorrow and turned it into strength. The next morning the villagers came to the river again, uneasy. They found her standing knee-deep in the water, her eyes closed, her hair streaming around her shoulders. The strange plants had spread further overnight, curling along the bank, their leaves shimmering faintly as if lit from within. "She is called the river spirits," one elder whispered. "No," another muttered. "The river has called her." Fear flickered in their eyes but also awe. The girl did not speak to them, nor did she leave the water. The river's current circled her legs like a guardian, and the humming sound never ceased. That night, long after the villagers had returned to their huts, the river lifted its song higher, louder, until it carried across the whole valley. And every time it rose, the girl heard her name, clear, strong, eternal. The river had awakened, and it would not be silenced again. The first days after the river's strange awakening were filled with wonder. Children whispered of glowing plants near the bank. Women swore they heard soft voices when drawing water. Men muttered about shadows beneath the surface. Some villagers even lingered longer by the river than usual, leaning forward with curiosity, hoping to catch a whisper of their own names. But wonder turned quickly to unease. For the river was no longer quiet, no longer a background presence in their lives. It had become a voice, a song that wound through every corner of the village. By day its humming filled the air like distant drums, and by night it swelled into a chorus that carried across the rooftops. At first it sounded beautiful, haunting but gentle. Then, the longer it lasted, the more oppressive it became. People woke with the sound pressing against their ears. Mothers rocked their children who cried in their sleep, saying they heard someone calling from the water. The elders gathered at the village square, their faces drawn and grave. "This is no ordinary river song," said one, his voice trembling. "The spirits are restless. Something has been disturbed." "It is her," another whispered, jerking his chin toward the girl, who was sitting quietly at the edge of the crowd. She had been different since the night she was left at the river. Everyone saw it. She no longer slouched or hid her face. She stood taller, her eyes brighter, as if she carried light inside her. And the river itself seemed to lean toward her whenever she drew near, as though answering her silent call. Some villagers averted their eyes when she passed. Others crossed themselves or spat on the ground, muttering prayers under their breath. It was one thing to pity a girl left crying by the water, but another entirely to face her when the river itself seemed to bend around her. Her stepmother was the loudest in protest. She went from door to door, her voice sharp as a knife. "She is cursed. She has brought this strangeness upon us. Why else would the water whisper her name? Why else would the plants grow from her tears? The river is angry and she is the reason." Her words struck home with many who were already unsettled. Fear spreads faster than truth, and soon people began to murmur that perhaps the girl had indeed bargained with the river spirits, giving them her soul in exchange for power. The girl heard these whispers, but she said nothing. Each evening she returned to the bank, sitting where the current ran swiftest. The humming song deepened when she came, as though the water was glad for her company. And each night, the faces beneath the surface seemed clearer, their voices stronger, their words more insistent. "You are not forgotten. You are not alone." The stepmother, however, grew more desperate. She forbade her own children from fetching water from the river. She made them take their jars to distant wells, though it meant walking for hours. She spat whenever the girl passed, muttering that the child was a serpent, a danger, a curse. But fear has a way of turning even the bravest hearts against themselves. Though she shouted the loudest, she too began to tremble at the river's song, waking in the night as if it were calling her by name. Then the river began to rise. Not in a flood, at least not yet. The water grew restless, slapping harder against the banks, its voice swelling louder with every passing night. The strange plants multiplied, their roots gripping the earth, their leaves shimmering faintly as though lit from within. Villagers swore they saw them move, swaying toward the girl when she approached. "The river has chosen her," an old woman whispered one morning, though her voice quaked with fear. "It has claimed her." Another spat back, "If the river has claimed her, then she should go to it and leave us in peace." Fear spread like wildfire. Children were warned to stay away from her. Men sharpened their spears, not daring to say what they might use them for. Women crossed their doorways with herbs to ward off spirits. But still no one could ignore the voice of the river. It wove through their dreams, seeped into their waking hours, a song they could neither escape nor forget. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, the villagers gathered at the edge of the water, demanding answers. They turned on the girl, their faces grim, their voices raised. "What have you done?" one shouted. "Why does it call your name?" another demanded. "Speak!" cried her stepmother, stepping forward with wild eyes. "Tell them the truth. Tell them you have bound us all to the river's curse." The girl looked at them, her hands trembling at her sides. For the first time in her life, all eyes were on her, not with indifference, not with cruelty, but with fear. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, the river swelled with a roar, its song surging into a thunderous chorus. The villagers stumbled back, their torches flickering in the sudden wind. And through the roar came a single word, carried by water, by air, by the trembling earth beneath their feet. Her name. Spoken not by the girl, not by the villagers, but by the river itself. The crowd froze, terror etched into their faces. And in that moment the girl realized the truth. The river was no longer simply answering her. It was defending her. The villagers fled, scattering into the night, whispering prayers to keep the river at bay. But no prayer could silence what had begun. The river had chosen. And nothing would turn it back. The storm in the village had begun long before any cloud appeared in the sky. It was not rain that troubled the people now, but the fear that settled in their bones every time the river sang the girl's name. The villagers avoided her, whispering when she passed. Some made signs of protection over their doors, others tossed salt on the ground as if to block her shadow. Her stepmother watched all this unfold with a bitterness that burned hotter than fire. Once the girl had been her burden, unwanted, easily dismissed. Now she had become the center of whispers, the one the river itself seemed to bend toward. And though the attention was born of fear, it unsettled the stepmother deeply. She has bewitched the water, she spat to her daughters one evening, pacing their smoky hut. She thinks herself special, as if the spirits care for her tears. But no river spirit sings without cost. If the water calls her name, then it is because it wants to claim her soul, and we will give it what it wants. Her daughters, frightened by the strange happenings, clung to her words. They had seen the glowing plants sprouting near the bank, had heard the voices rising from the current. The younger whispered, "But mother, what if she truly has been chosen? What if hurting her makes it worse?" The stepmother's eyes narrowed. "Worse? Do you not see? The river has cursed us all because of her. Our neighbors avoid us. The elders mutter against us. If she is gone, the river will quiet and our lives will return to peace." That night, while the rest of the village huddled in unease, the stepmother led her daughters to the riverbank. The moon was full, its pale light spilling across the restless current. The girl was there as always, sitting close to the water's edge, her hair damp from the spray, her gaze fixed on the shifting surface. She looked like part of the river now, as if she belonged more to it than to land. "Go back," hissed the older stepsister, fear tugging at her. "She hears the voices. She will know we've come." But the stepmother would not be swayed. She had brought with her a bundle of sharp thorns, gathered from the brambles in the hills, and a jar of salt. These were the weapons she believed would sever the girl's bond with the water. Thorns to pierce, salt to scatter and drive away spirits. They crept closer, hearts hammering, but the girl did not turn. It was as though the river itself shielded her, the sound of its current muffling their steps. At last the stepmother lunged forward, seizing the girl's wrist. The girl gasped, startled, but before she could cry out, the stepmother pressed the thorns into her palm. Blood welled instantly, dripping down her arm. "You will not bind us to your curse," the woman hissed. "We will give the river what it wants, your blood, your silence, your life." The girl's knees buckled, but the river roared in protest. The current surged, splashing up the bank with sudden force. The jar of salt slipped from the stepmother's grasp, shattering on the stones. Its contents dissolved instantly, swept away as if the water refused to let them remain. The younger stepsister screamed, clutching her ears. The song of the river had grown deafening, as though every spirit within its depths was rising up in fury. Faces churned in the current, eyes gleaming pale under the moonlight. The thorns flew from the stepmother's hand, ripped away by a sudden wind, and scattered into the water where they vanished. The girl, still bleeding from her palm, stared at the current with wide eyes. The water had taken her pain, swallowed it, and now it seemed to burn brighter. The glowing plants along the bank pulsed with light, their leaves trembling as if alive. "Do you see?" the girl whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "It does not want my death. It wants my life. It has always wanted to carry what others cast aside." The stepmother recoiled, fear breaking through her rage. "No," she whispered. "No, you are cursed." But the river answered for the girl. Its surface swelled, rising higher and higher, until it nearly lapped at the stepmother's feet. She stumbled backward, dragging her daughters with her. The humming chorus had become a roar, a storm of voices crying the girl's name again and again until it echoed across the night. Terrified, the stepmother fled, her daughters stumbling behind her. They vanished into the shadows of the huts, their faces pale as bone. The girl remained at the bank, clutching her wounded hand. The blood no longer dripped into the soil. The river had already taken it, and where it touched the water, light shimmered like molten gold. She sank to her knees, overcome. She had not asked for this bond, yet it had claimed her fully. And now, it seemed, the river had not only claimed her, it had chosen to protect her. But protection, she realized with a chill, often came at a price. The village slept uneasily, though sleep was hardly the word. Mothers clutched their children, men kept weapons by their mats, elders whispered prayers into the night. All feared the sound that never ceased, the low, ceaseless humming of the river. It was no longer gentle, no longer background. It rolled like distant thunder, echoing through the huts, filling every silence. The girl lay awake on the riverbank, her wounded hand wrapped in a strip of cloth. The blood had slowed, but she still felt the strange warmth inside her chest, as though the river's current now flowed in her veins. Every beat of her heart seemed to match the rhythm of the water, each breath she took answered by the river's song. By dawn, the people realized the river had changed again. Its surface boiled though no wind stirred. The water ran higher than it had in years, climbing the banks, gnawing at the soil. And all through the day the song grew louder, no longer a hum but a chant, words threading through the current. Her name, her sorrow, her truth. The villagers were terrified. It will drown us, they cried. The river rises for her. Some demanded that she be cast into the current, sacrificed to calm its rage. Others muttered that she had already sold her soul and that no offering could undo what was done. The elders who had once spoken with cautious wisdom, now quarreled openly. None could agree, for none could deny what they had seen: the water swelling toward her, the plants that bloomed from her tears, the faces that stirred beneath the surface. The stepmother, pale with fear but hardened with hate, raised her voice above the others. You see now. She is no child of ours, she is the river's witch. If we do not rid ourselves of her, the flood will take us all. Her words carried through the crowd like sparks in dry grass. The people, desperate, turned toward the girl who stood at the edge of the water, silent as stone. Torches were raised, spears pointed. But before anyone could step forward, the river moved. It did not flood, not yet. Instead, its voice rose higher, a deafening chorus that shook the ground beneath their feet. Lightning forked across the sky though no storm cloud had gathered, and the torches sputtered out in the sudden wind. The villagers fell back, clutching each other in terror. The girl lifted her head. Her eyes reflected the light of the river, shining as if they carried its depths within them. She did not speak, yet the water answered in her stead. Waves crashed against the banks, sending spray high into the air. The glowing plants bent and trembled, their leaves flashing like silver blades in the moonlight. And then the river struck. Its current surged forward, rushing through the village streets, sweeping away baskets, clay pots, wooden stools. Huts shuddered under the weight of the water as it poured through doorways. Children screamed, clinging to their mothers. Men tried to stand firm, but the current tore at their legs, forcing them back. Still, the water did not drown them. It rose to their knees, their waists, but never higher. It was not death the river sought, it was fear, and it gave it freely. The villagers cried out, begging the spirits for mercy. But the river's song was merciless, a chorus of forgotten voices that had been silenced too long. Through the roar, the girl heard them clearly. They were not only calling her name, they were calling for justice, for remembrance, for every soul the village had cast aside, every tear ignored. Her stepmother, fighting the current, screamed above the noise. You bring this upon us. Call it back. Command it to stop. The girl turned, her eyes blazing. I do not command it, she said, her voice steady and strange, carrying as loudly as the thunder. It commands me. The stepmother faltered, stumbling back. For the first time she saw not the weeping child she had tormented, but something greater, something she could not bend or break. The water rose again, surging toward the huts of the stepmother and her daughters. With a crash, it tore through the walls, dragging mats and cooking pots into its depths. The stepmother screamed, clawing at the mud, but the current pulled at her legs, dragging her closer to the river's heart. Her daughters shrieked, reaching for her, but the current seemed to choose its prey, wrapping around her alone. The girl stepped forward, her wounded hand outstretched. For a heartbeat, the current stilled as if waiting. The girl's voice trembled, but it carried above the roar. Enough. The river froze, its song dropping into silence. The stepmother collapsed onto the bank, gasping, soaked and shaking, her eyes wide with terror. The current pulled back, leaving her in the mud, spared but broken. The villagers stared in silence, their torches extinguished, their huts half ruined. The water receded slowly, dragging with it fragments of wood and stone, as if it had taken payment for its fury. The humming song lingered, quieter now, but it did not vanish. The girl lowered her hand, trembling. She had not known if the river would obey, but it had. Not because she commanded it as a master, but because she had become its vessel. The villagers fell to their knees, some in prayer, some in fear, some in awe. None dared to speak against her now. The river had shown its power, and it had chosen her as its mouthpiece. But even as the current settled, the girl felt the truth burning inside her chest. The river's fury was not ended. It had only begun. That night, silence never returned to the village. The water lay calm on the surface, but its song seeped through the soil, the huts, even the air. The people could not escape it. Mothers tried to hush their children, but the little ones whispered her name in their sleep, echoing the river's chant. Men who once swore they feared nothing pressed their hands to their ears, trembling at voices only they could hear. The girl did not rest either. She sat upon the wet bank, her knees drawn to her chest, staring into the rippling dark. The moon was high, silver spilling across the river like oil. In its glow, she saw faces rising and falling beneath the current. Old women, young men, children, all those whose lives had been stolen by cruelty or neglect, by storms and sickness, by hunger that the village had ignored. They whispered to her. Their words twined with the water's song, weaving into one. We remember. We are not gone. Through you we will be heard. At first, she shook her head, pressing her palms against her temples. She wanted no crown of river voices, no burden of the dead. But the more she resisted, the louder the song became, until her very bones hummed with it. The scar on her hand burned faintly, and she realized the river had left its mark, not just on her skin but on her soul. The midnight hour came, and with it the song swelled. The water glowed faintly as though starlight had sunk into its depths. The glowing plants bent toward her, their leaves trembling in rhythm. The air thickened, charged like before a storm. The villagers crept from their huts despite their fear, drawn unwillingly to the bank. No one spoke. They stood in a circle, torches unlit, eyes wide in the moonlight. All waited. The girl rose slowly, the river's light reflecting in her eyes. She did not feel herself entirely, her body was her own, but her voice carried more than her words when she spoke. You left me here, she said, her voice carrying across the water. You left me to weep, to starve, to fade. But the river remembered my tears when you did not. Her words echoed in the current, magnified until the banks themselves seemed to shake. The river sings every sorrow you tried to bury. Every child you cast aside. Every voice you silenced. The stepmother tried to shout back, but no sound left her throat. She clutched her neck, eyes wide with terror, as though the river itself had stolen her voice. The villagers fell to their knees, begging for forgiveness. But the song rose louder, drowning their cries. The girl felt the weight of choice pressing down upon her. The river was ready to act again, whether to destroy or to renew. She closed her eyes, listening deeper. Beneath the fury, beneath the grief, there was another current, hope. The dead did not only weep, they longed for their stories to be remembered, their love to live on. They wanted the village not destroyed but transformed. The girl stepped forward into the water. It parted around her legs, swirling in luminous patterns, lifting her without dragging her down. The river carried her gently to the center, where the current was strongest. And there, under the midnight moon, the song shifted. No longer a chant of rage, it became a hymn, rising, soaring, weaving sorrow into beauty. The villagers gasped as the current itself began to shape images upon its surface. Children playing, women dancing, men sowing seed in fertile fields. The river showed them what had been lost, but also what could be restored. The girl raised her hand, and the scar upon her palm glowed faintly. Her voice carried with the song. This river remembers. From this night so must you. Forget no life, no tear, no voice. Or the river will rise again. The current surged high into the air, scattering droplets like jewels across the village. Wherever they touched, the earth grew green. Broken huts mended themselves with vines and blossoms. The people's ragged clothing brightened with threads of color, as though sewn anew by unseen hands. The villagers wept openly now, not with fear but with awe. The river was no longer only a terror but a promise. As the song waned, the girl felt the river release her gently back to the bank. She stood dripping and trembling, her chest still humming with the echoes of its voices. When she looked up, every villager was on their knees, not in worship of her, but in reverence of the river that had chosen her. And in the silence after the song, they knew midnight had marked not just the river's fury, but the beginning of something neither storm nor hatred could undo. Dawn came slowly, as if even the sun was wary of approaching the river. The first streaks of pale gold slid across the water, and with them the song faded into silence. But the silence was not empty, it trembled, alive with the memory of voices. The villagers, who had not dared to move since midnight, blinked against the new light and saw her still standing at the river's edge. She was no longer the same girl they had abandoned. Something in her had shifted, as if the river had carved her from its own depths. Her hair, once tangled with grief, glistened with dew and strands of silver, catching the dawn. Her eyes held a brightness that seemed to belong to both sky and water, and her scarred palms still carried the faint shimmer of moonlight. When she turned toward the people, they lowered their heads. Not one could meet her gaze. They saw in her face both the child they had wronged and the river's daughter they could never claim. The stepmother crouched in the dirt, trembling. For the first time she looked small, no longer the sharp-tongued ruler of the house, but a woman hollowed out by her own cruelty. She lifted her eyes, red-rimmed, and whispered, "Forgive me." The girl did not answer. She walked past her slowly, her bare feet leaving damp prints that gleamed in the morning light. Rain still clung to her skin though the storm had passed, as if water refused to part from her. The villagers shifted to clear a path, bowing their heads as she moved through them. Children peeked up shyly, their faces soft with wonder rather than fear. One little boy, too young to understand the depth of the night, reached out a hand. When her gaze fell on him, he smiled instead of trembling. She paused, crouched, and touched his cheek gently. The boy laughed, a sound so pure it seemed to heal some unseen wound in the air. The people gasped. They had expected curses, punishment, fire in her voice. Instead there was this gentleness, as clear and unexpected as dawn after a storm. But she did not linger. The river called her still, not with grief but with a quiet pull, a reminder that she belonged more to water and wind than to earth and walls. She walked back to the bank, the villagers following at a distance, afraid to lose sight of her. The sun broke fully over the horizon then, and the river lit up like liquid gold. The water reflected her shape, not as she was but as something larger, her form woven with streams and light, her hair rippling like current, her eyes endless as the sky. The villagers fell to their knees again, not out of fear, but because they knew they were seeing a truth larger than themselves. She lifted her hand once more, the scar gleaming. "Your lives will continue," she said softly, though the sound carried like thunder. "But never again will you forget the tears of the forsaken. The river will remember when you do not. And if cruelty takes root among you once more, the waters will rise, not to drown you but to remind you." The people wept openly. Some clutched each other, others pressed their foreheads to the soil. They promised aloud, voices overlapping, that they would remember, that they would teach their children, that no child would be abandoned again. The girl closed her eyes and listened. The river was silent now, yet she felt its approval, a steady heartbeat beneath her own. When she opened them again, she knew the moment of parting had come. Without another word, she stepped into the water. It curled around her ankles, cool and welcoming. She walked deeper, and as the current reached her waist, the villagers cried out, begging her to stay. But she did not turn. At last, the river drew her fully into its embrace, and in the golden light of dawn, she dissolved into ripples of silver and gold. For a heartbeat, her figure shimmered across the surface, as if carved from mist and memory. Then she was gone. The villagers stood in silence, hearts heavy and awed. Behind them, the first green shoots of morning grass rose where her footprints had been. They knew the truth now, the girl they had abandoned was no longer theirs. She had become the river's daughter, and dawn itself bore her name. The years that followed were marked by a change the village had never known. Where once indifference had hardened their hearts, reverence grew in its place. No one could forget the night the river sang, nor the dawn when the girl walked into its depths. Her memory clung to the air like the mist that curled above the water each morning. The elders were the first to speak of it. "We must not let her vanish twice," they said. And so, they gathered the children in the square and told them the story, how a girl was left weeping and how the river answered her when no one else would. They spoke of her shimmering hair, her luminous eyes, her silence that carried the weight of storms. Each telling ended with the same words, "Remember her, for forgetting is the root of cruelty." In time, the villagers built a small shrine by the bank where she had last stood. It was simple, smooth stones gathered from the riverbed, stacked with care, and a bowl where offerings could be placed. The first offerings were small, wildflowers, hand-woven bracelets, painted shells. Later, people brought bread, fruit, or cups of water, for they believed the river would carry their gifts to her. Seasons turned, and her presence seemed to weave itself into the rhythm of the land. When rains came gently, the people said she was blessing them. When storms raged, they said she was warning them. The river's moods became her moods, its voice her voice. No one dared harm it again, nor waste its waters, nor neglect its banks. They taught their children to bow before drinking, to whisper gratitude before washing. The stepmother and stepsisters, once feared, now lived in shadow. Shame marked them like a second skin. The stepmother aged quickly, her hair silvering before its time. She was seen often at the riverbank, kneeling before the shrine, her hands trembling as she laid down offerings of bread. Some whispered that she prayed for forgiveness, but whether she received it, no one knew. For the girl's spirit was not cruel, but neither was it indulgent. The river had given her a voice when her kin denied her one. It had carried her sorrow into song, her tears into power. She had risen not to avenge but to remind, and that reminder lingered, sharp as the scent of wet earth after rain. As years passed, festivals grew around her memory. At the first full moon of each spring, villagers gathered at the riverbanks with lanterns carved from gourds. They set them afloat, each lantern carrying a name whispered into the flame, names of the forgotten, the unloved, the children who had once gone unseen. The sight of hundreds of tiny lights drifting across the dark water became a promise. no one in the village would be abandoned again. Children began to play a game called The River's Daughter. One child would sit by the water pretending to cry, while others would circle and sing, their voices rising until the river answered. It was a game of laughter, but beneath it lay reverence, for even the youngest knew they were echoing something sacred. Travelers who passed through the village carried tales of the river girl beyond the forests and hills. In distant lands, people spoke of a spirit who had risen from grief, whose name was carried on the tide. Some came in pilgrimage, walking barefoot to the shrine, kneeling to leave offerings though they had never known her. The villagers welcomed them, proud yet humbled. She was ours once, they said, but now she belongs to the water and to all who listen. And always at the edge of morning, when the mist rose silver and gold, some swore they saw her figure, half light, half water, moving gently across the river. She did not speak. She did not return. But her presence was undeniable, a reminder that the river never forgets, even when people do. The girl who had been left alone in sorrow was alone no longer. She was sung of, prayed to, remembered. Her name had become a current running through the village, a song they could never again silence. Generations passed, yet the river's song lingered. Children grew, elders faded, seasons shifted, but no one forgot the night when water had spoken, carrying the voice of a forsaken child. The story outlived those who had lived it. It was passed from lips to ears, from fireside to cradle, until it became less a tale of one girl and more a truth etched into the world itself. The village changed. Huts gave way to stronger homes, fields grew wider, and paths stretched further into the forests. But no matter how far they built, the river remained the center of their lives, its voice humming beneath everything. Each dawn, people came to its edge to bow their heads. Mothers taught their children to listen for its whispers. Hunters poured drops of water into the soil before leaving, asking protection. Farmers dipped their hands in the stream before planting, calling for blessing. Every year, on the night of her abandonment, the village held the Lantern Festival. Hundreds of lights drifted down the river, each lantern carrying prayers. Sometimes the people whispered her name. Sometimes they whispered their own. Always, the river carried the lights away, weaving them into its endless song. On such nights, the water gleamed brighter than stars, and even the youngest child knew that the girl was near. Travelers came more often now. Word of the river's daughter had traveled far beyond the hills, carried by merchants, wanderers, and storytellers. Pilgrims arrived from distant villages, kneeling at the shrine, weeping into the water, asking to be remembered. Some said that after leaving, their sorrows lifted, as though the river had swallowed grief. Others claimed they dreamed of her, her hair glistening with silver strands, her eyes like dawn breaking through rain. Scholars too came. They tried to explain the story as a parable, a symbol of kindness or cruelty. They wrote it into scrolls, giving her no name, calling her instead the river's daughter or the voice of the forgotten. But the villagers smiled at such words. They did not argue. For to them she was not just a symbol, she was flesh and memory, a girl they had wronged and a spirit who had risen beyond them. The stepmother's line withered. Her descendants bore the weight of shame, though they tried to turn away from it. Some fled the village entirely, never to return. Yet even in other lands the story found them. No matter how far they went, when rivers flooded, when storms sang, people whispered of the girl who had once been forsaken. Shame became their inheritance, though a few among them returned to the village generations later, seeking forgiveness at the shrine. The river never spoke to condemn them, nor did it absolve them. It remained as it had always been, flowing, remembering, eternal. The girl's legend deepened with each retelling. Some said she became the river itself, her tears turning into waves, her hair becoming reeds, her voice the current. Others believed she had risen beyond water, into the sky, guiding clouds and storms, bending rainbows across the earth as her sign. Children pointed at lightning and said, "She is walking there." Old men, hearing thunder, whispered, "She is calling a name." And yet, beneath all the grandeur, the story's heart remained simple. A child once wept, and the world itself refused to ignore her tears. That was what mothers told daughters, what fathers told sons, what lovers whispered to each other in secret. It was not just about a river or a spirit, but about the truth that no sorrow is ever truly lost, no cry ever truly unheard. On the 100th year after her departure, the villagers carved a new stone at the shrine. Upon it were etched these words. They left her by the water, but the water remembered. They silenced her voice, but the river sang. They abandoned her name, but the dawn carried it still. That stone became the heart of the shrine, and those who knelt before it touched its surface as though touching her hand. Even now, when storms roll across the sky and rivers swell with rain, people in faraway lands tell her story. They say, "Beware of casting aside the innocent, for the world itself will rise to hold them." They teach children to be kind, lest their cruelty echo louder than thunder. They listen to rivers, for they believe each carries a fragment of her voice, a strand of her endless song. And on certain nights, when the moon is bright and the water glitters silver, some swear they see her. A girl walking barefoot across the surface, her hair wet with starlight, her gaze filled with dawn. She does not speak. She does not return. But she lingers, forever present, forever remembered. For though they left her crying beside the river had sung her name all night. And that song has never ended.